Good morning, everyone, and they just ignore me. I say it again with a bit more energy so I can get a response. So good evening, everyone. Good evening. Are we all well? Thank you for that. So it's lovely to have you with us. It's lovely to have you with us at the 15th installment of the Dullah Omar Memorial Lecture. Thank you to those who made time to be here at the venue. Okay, microphones. Thank you to those who made time to be here at the venue, as well as those who are joining us online. It really is wonderful to stand here, scan the room briefly, and see a couple of faces who were with us last year. It speaks to how memorial lectures bring us together. They're cemented in our lives, and it's a continued remembrance and honoring of the legacy of Dullah Omar. My name is Tabile Konkos-Pambo. I am a researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute, as well as a lecturer in the Department of Public Law and Jurisprudence at the Law Faculty, and I will be your program director for this evening. Now, before we get into the business of the evening, just some house rules. Our cell phones, could we please have them on silent or vibrate? We're very busy people, I believe, and so we wouldn't want to interrupt the events of the evening. If you need the bathroom, you can exit through any of the doors. We've got our team members in black who can show you where the gents are and where the ladies are. And then lastly, our social media handles are in the program. If you go to the very end, you'll find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. Please post about the event, tell the world, and have them join us in what's happening today. And so, with that out of the way, I would like to call onto stage or bring onto stage to do our opening remarks for the evening, Professor Lucas Munting, who is the director of the Dullah Omar Institute. Please give a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much, Tabile, and good evening again. And thank you very much for taking the trouble and facing the Cape Town traffic to be here at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. It is really appreciated, and we attach much value to your enthusiasm and support for the Dullah Omar Institute and our annual Dullah Omar Memorial Lecture. So a special word of welcome to the Omar family. We truly appreciate your continued support for the annual memorial lectures. We were informed shortly prior to this evening's events that Mrs. Farida Omar is not well, and she will not be able to attend, but please convey our well wishes to her. And we hope for a speedy recovery and that we will see her next year at the Dullah Omar Memorial Lecture. So, to continue with the focus on the Omar family, by way of introductions, a few years ago the Omar family donated some documents from Advocate Omar's study. That's why I assume they were kept. And these documents and other items were given to us. And when we went through them, we really discovered a treasure trove of important historical documents that predate his involvement with the Institute, or the Center as it was then known, and other documents from those early days of the Institute. And this we've now catalogued into a searchable electronic archive. And there are some 900 records in that archive. And I think it's a very proper way to record history and the influence that Advocate Omar had on us as an institute at the university and more broader on South African society. Now, our lecturer tonight will reflect on this, but I'll leave that to him. So over the years, these lectures have attracted a diverse audience, and this year again is no exception, with people from the legal profession, academics, students, people from the diplomatic corps, civil society organizations who are all in attendance. And let me officially welcome you to this 15th Dullah Omar Memorial Lecture. I wish to particularly acknowledge our Rector and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Balfour, also Professor Steytler, who will address us later tonight, Professor De Ville, the Dean of the Law Faculty, our chairperson, Advocate Sebonile Koza, who also took ill, unfortunately, and is joining us online. And then we also have Professor Chirwa here, the Dean of the Law Faculty at UWC. And then I must also acknowledge Weber Wenzel, who's been supporting these events over the years. We are truly grateful for your continued support in these lectures. We also have tonight in the audience a special group of people, being the 24 participants in the African School on Decentralization. This is a 2-week program hosted by the SACHI Chair and the Center for Federalism and Governance Studies at the Addis Ababa University. The participants are from 10 different countries from Africa. I'm not going to list all of them, but the 24 participants on the ASD, you are most welcome here. Now, the previous lecture was by Justice Zondo, who was then Chief Justice, and his presence was enabled by Justice Majid, which made it really easy to get the Chief Justice to address us. Let me just say it was not that easy getting tonight's speaker to address us. He's a shy man, but we look forward to your address, Nico. It is perhaps opportune at this moment to reflect very briefly on why we do these memorial lectures. And we gather each year in these lectures to remember, to reflect, and to renew. We remember the life and the work of Advocate Omar, a life marked by courage, principle, and unwavering dedication to justice. We reflect on the meaning of that legacy for our own time, and in so doing, we renew our shared commitment to the values he embodied. A memorial lecture is, at its heart, an act of collective memory. It is a way of saying that certain lives matter, not only for what they have achieved, but for what they continue to teach us. In remembering Advocate Omar, we resist forgetting the moral clarity and public service that helped shape our democracy. These gatherings are therefore not nostalgic occasions, they are civic acts. Moments where we choose to keep certain truths alive in our national and institutional life. Memorial lectures also create bridges between generations. They invite those who did not know the honoree personally to encounter their ideas, their struggles, and their example. Each generation, in its own time, reinterprets that example in light of new challenges. What does justice mean in our own era? What does principled leadership look like today? In asking such questions, we allow a legacy to remain alive, evolving, and relevant. We are also reminded that many of the ideals for which Advocate Omar stood remain unfinished work, and in some cases, undone work. The building of a democratic, accountable, and inclusive society is never complete. In that sense, memorial lectures are not only tributes to the past, they are calls to action in the present. They challenge us to measure our progress against the high standards of courage, integrity, and service that defined his life. Each year's lecture and each speaker we invite becomes part of an ongoing conversation, a conversation about law, governance, and justice that remains vital to our democracy. This evening, we are honored to continue that conversation with Professor Emeritus Nico Steytler, whose scholarship and institutional memory enrich our understanding of the themes that defined Advocate Omar's life's work. Finally, memorial lectures bring people together. They create a sense of community among those who share respect for the honoree's contribution, but also among those who share a hope for the kind of society he imagined. In gathering, we affirm that a legacy is not a monument to be admired from a distance, but an invitation to act, to think critically, to serve selflessly, and to continue the work. As we look to the months ahead, which promise to be interesting, there's a local government election coming up. We have this opportunity tonight to listen to Professor Steytler reflecting on the legacy of Dullah Omar, the human rights lawyer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that welcome, Professor Munting. Next up, I would like to call onto the podium to do the, it was actually opening remarks, I'm sorry. Next up, I'd like to call onto the podium to do the welcome, our Rector and Vice Chancellor, Professor Robert Balfour.
Thank you very much, Tabile. Thank you, Prof. Lucas. And good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our students, our colleagues, our distinguished guests. It's a special occasion in many ways, but I also want to make mention of a tragic incident. We lost a student over the weekend to suicide. It's a devastating occurrence for a university. And with the pressures coming up in terms of the exam period, which occurs at the end of this month, I thought I should just mention this to you in my opening remarks and ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you very much. So it's a presence among us being together tonight that we are celebrating the memory of a great figure in our civic lives. And we are reminded through this very special lecture of the late Dullah Omar and his invaluable contribution, not only to the development of justice, but also his role in terms of advocacy and education. I want to acknowledge Prof. Jacques Deville, the Dean of the Faculty of Law at UWC, and thank him and the entire academic community of the faculty for their support for this evening's occasion and all the organization that has gone into it. I want to also extend a warm word of welcome to the Omar family, some of whom I was able to meet shortly before the lecture. Thank you so much for your continued support and your presence for this very special memorial occurring as it does on our annual calendar. And of course, to our long-standing partners, Weber Wenzel and Linklaters, thank you also for your continued support for this lecture series. The memorial lecture was established to honor and recognize the values that guided his life and his work. He stood, as I said, for justice, but also for human dignity. He stood for democracy, he stood for the importance of education, and indeed, his contribution to UWC and education here is well recognized. These principles continue to inspire us as UWC. They continue to make sense to us, and why we believe in the values that he stood for are also aligned to our values as an institution and continue to remain relevant. So this lecture series has for many years now, a good 15 years, provided a space for open conversation and a reflection on South Africa's constitutional journey. And over the years, speakers such as Thabo Mbeki, Desmond Tutu, Gracia Michel, Thuli Madonsela, really it's the list of the great and the good if you look at it. And of course, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has shared with us insights and experiences. If you look at the lectures together, they've created also a platform for honest dialogue about challenges and responsibilities. And it's right that this lecture happen at a university. A university should be that kind of place where challenge to truth can come to the fore in a way that is not only protected and encouraged, but in fact celebrated. So it's a proud tradition that connects us all as academic community, and I thank you again for making it meaningful for us by being together tonight, even for those who have joined online. Advocate Omar's association with UWC began in 1990. He was the founding director of the then Community Law Center, the center we now call the Dullah Omar Institute for Constitutional Law, Governance and Human Rights. It emerged at a defining moment in our country's history during a time when the foundations for the democratic state were being built, and it was under his leadership that this center became a hub at UWC for research and advocacy work. There weren't many places, thinking back to that period in South Africa, where that combination was made possible. And it was thanks to his leadership here that we could focus in a way on the structure of the state, the transformation of the judiciary, gender and also children's rights, in the promotion of rights more generally and the promotion of our democracy. Of course, in 1994, he was appointed by the president at the time, President Mandela, as Minister of Justice, and it was under his guidance that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established. The Constitutional Court also came into being at this time, and the justice system as we now know it had many of its foundations during this period. There's a certain level of nostalgia that people feel when looking back at that period in South Africa. Nelson Mandela himself once described Dullah Omar as a lawyer of the people, a human rights lawyer in the truest meaning of the word, noting that his sense of humility and duty were matched only by his commitment to education and to justice. So for us at UWC, the legacy is both personal and institutional. It is both public and private. He showed that scholarship, advocacy, and ethical leadership as a human being can coexist. He demonstrated that the law, when grounded in a conscience, can serve justice and serve humanity, serving our communities. In my concluding remarks, I want to talk about Prof. Nico Steytler, a professor emeritus among us of the Institute. The topic, the legacy of Dullah Omar, the human rights lawyer, is no more relevant than here at UWC and at this time in our country, and invites us to think about the legacy as it speaks to our time. It challenges us to strengthen human rights, constitutional governance, and the rule of law in a time globally where uncertainty and a declining public trust characterize the discourse. For UWC, these conversations speak to our mission of advancing engaged scholarship. It's also about teaching and research that come together this evening on the social issues that are relevant to our moment. On behalf of the university, I want to extend our thanks to the Omar family for their continued support, to Professor Lucas Munting and his colleagues at the Institute for their leadership, to our academic partners and our sponsors for their collaboration, and of course to Professor Steytler for sharing his insights with us this evening. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Professor Balfour. Now, the following two gentlemen that I'm about to call on stage, I work very closely with, and they work and continue to work very closely with the keynote speaker for the evening. Professors Jaap de Visser and Professor Tinashe Chikwata from the Dullah Omar Institute will be doing the introduction of the speaker for the evening. Please give them a round of applause.
What an extraordinary night for the Institute, the Faculty of Law, and the broader UWC community. We have the distinct privilege of welcoming a speaker who has made a tangible impact in many of our lives. Professor Nico Steytler's career is long, varied, and by all accounts, impressive. He holds a BA and an LLB from the University of Stellenbosch, an LLM from the University of London, and a PhD from the University of Natal. After a brief period in the Department of Justice, he joined the University of Natal in 1980 and taught there for a decade, after which he moved to UWC. In 1990, he became the director of what was then called the Community Law Center, now the Dullah Omar Institute, succeeding its founding director, whom we are honoring today. He led the Community Law Center for 23 years and transformed it from a think tank to support the African National Congress during the constitutional negotiations into an independent academic institution. At the same time, Nico became a world-renowned scholar in comparative constitutional law, making contributions to numerous constitutional making processes around the world. He has no fewer than 17 books to his name, more than 50 book chapters, and too many articles to even count. He holds a B1 rating from the National Research Foundation, which accredits him as a leading international scholar. He also holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, celebrating his contribution to constitutionalism internationally.
From the early 1990s onwards, Nico's scholarship started focusing on multi-level government within the broader context of constitutionalism, democracy, and development. He was an advisor to the National Assembly in the drafting of South Africa's 1996 Constitution, and an advisor to the Western Cape Parliament on the drafting of the Western Cape Constitution. And during those years, he founded a unit in the Community Law Center, as it was then called, that focused on local government, which ultimately grew into today's multi-level government project, headed by my colleague, Prof. Chigwata, and spawned the National Research Foundation Chair in Multi-Level Government, Law and Development, which he held for 10 years. Today, the Dullah Omar Institute is one of South Africa's premier think tanks on constitutionalism, governance, and human rights, with a footprint that is truly global. Now, Nico's scholarship can be characterized by a number of unique, distinct features. First, there is Nico's curiosity. Constitutional questions and conundrums, the exercise of public power, the human factor driving decision-making, and the impact of the combination of all of that on ordinary people fascinate him. Second, his scholarship is courageous and aimed at making an impact on society. He doesn't hesitate to step out of the academic realm and right into practice. Nico has occupied many positions in international and South African public bodies, including the Municipal Demarcation Board, the Finance and Fiscal Commission, and many others. He has also worked as a consultant to many governments across the world and international organizations. Third, Nico's scholarship is aimed at social justice, always searching for ways in which constitutionalism, human rights, and good governance can support the building of a just society. The protection of every person's dignity and the improvement of the well-being of ordinary people. Fourth, Nico's scholarship is creative. He will always bring that fresh angle or approach to a problem that nobody has ever thought of, inspired by his creative mind and his seemingly boundless knowledge collected over years of reading, teaching, conversing, and traveling.
Nico's dedication to mentorship is exceptional. His truest legacy lies in his students. He has supervised, mentored countless undergraduate and postgraduate students, as well as young academics, many of whom now occupy leading positions in the judiciary, government, academia, and civil society. We both stand before you as people whose life, both professionally and personally, was transformed by his guidance. His commitment to motivating others is legendary. I recall during a getaway with friends and colleagues in Beaufort West, where despite our reluctance to get moving, he insisted on a hike and promised a magnificent waterfall at the end. The walk was long, challenging, there was no path. After nearly 2 hours of climbing hills and 30 degrees heat, we reached the destination only to find the waterfall was merely a trickle. When we asked, where is the magnificent sight? He simply said, it must have dried up. We realized then that it was never about the waterfall. It was about the walk. It is about his ability to motivate us to navigate pathless terrain, that spirit, the ability to guide us through complexity, even when the promised end point changes. It is precisely what makes his perspective vital today.
Now, many of us in this room are part of that legacy. And we actually want to take a brief moment to give you the opportunity to show your gratitude. So if you have been taught, or if your thesis has been supervised, or if you have otherwise been mentored by Nico, can I please ask you to stand up? And Nico, you may want to turn around for that. Thank you so much. As a person, Nico is much more than the accomplished scholar and teacher. He's someone who's engaging, ebullient, forever helpful, full of initiative, and with a warm commitment to family and friends. And it's wonderful to have Michelle and Isabel here joining us tonight. Art and sports are among his many passions. Nico is a long-distance runner. He finished the Comrades Marathon I don't know how many times. He's an enthusiastic cyclist. He hardly ever skips a Cape Argus or Cape Town cycle tour, as it's now called. And he enjoys watching rugby. He keeps explaining the rules to me, and I still don't get it. He is a wonderful person all around. Our speaker this evening will reflect on the legacy of Dullah Omar, the human rights lawyer. Please join me in offering a truly warm and well-deserved welcome to the speaker of the 15th Memorial Lecture, Professor Nico Steytler.
Well, this is such wonderful to see so many faces, so many old friends, colleagues. I'm a bit of a little shivers here. It is really moving. And thank you for Jaap and Tinashe's great, kind words. I'm sure my family sitting here doesn't quite recognize me as the picture of the man they describe. So, it's an extraordinary privilege to give this year's memorial lecture. 21 years ago, as the director of the Community Law Center, I asked Auntie Farida whether the center could honor her late husband by instituting the Dullah Omar Memorial Lecture. She gave full and warm support, and she has attended almost everyone since then. I'm very sorry that she can't be here tonight. Having invited the most eminent persons associated with Dullah, and I think the rector mentioned them, you can understand that I was surprised and a bit embarrassed that I was asked to do the honors. I accepted, however, it, but with trepidation, but was fortified by the importance of the topic, the legacy of Dullah Omar, the human rights lawyer. Lucas has eloquently set out the purpose of memorial lectures, And I hope to do justice to this objective, to remember, to reflect, and to renew our commitment to Dullah's legacy. 3 decades after our embrace of constitutional democracy based on equality and human rights, our country is at a crossroads. The very foundation of our constitution is questioned. Inequality and poverty persist. Violence against women ever present. We are drowning in state corruption. We see the impunity of perpetrators. And our sense of insecurity is deepened by the ugly face of police corruption that dominates the daily news now. It is in this context that the legacy of Dullah Omar matters. President Mandela described Dullah, and the rector already quoted that famous saying, Dullah was a human rights lawyer in the truest sense of the word. These are words of high praise, but what did Mandela mean by them? This we can discover by paying careful attention to Dullah's words and his deeds. I will focus on the 3 phases of Dullah's work as a lawyer. First, his work as a lawyer in court during the struggle against apartheid. Second, his work as a constitutional policymaker from 1990 to 1994 as director of the Centre. He envisaged and helped give shape to a new human rights and democratic regime in South Africa. Third, his work in implementing that vision. As the first Minister of Justice in Mandela's cabinet, Dullah was responsible for translating the vision into hard-won reality. During the 3 phases, certain thoughts and actions are fundamental to our understanding of what made Dullah a human rights lawyer in the truest meaning of the word. Let us start with Dullah as a practicing lawyer during the struggle years. 4 elements stand out. First, he was a lawyer of the people, the oppressed. From the start of his public life, Dullah was a staunch supporter of the unity movement, a Trotskyite intellectual group, and his affinity lay with the Pan-African Congress, a breakaway from the ANC. He eventually became its official attorney. While representing the PAC incarcerated cadres on Robben Islands, he also began to represent the ANC on the island. At the time, it was a big deal, so much so that Nelson Mandela expressed his appreciation as follows. I came to know Dullah when I was on the Robben Island, and he visited us as a lawyer. He was not a member of the African National Congress at the time, but that made no difference to his commitment and his caring for us. Dullah was a lawyer of the people, a human rights lawyer in the truest meaning of the word. In Mandela's lexicon, the people referred to all the people who were subjected to the repressive and brutal apartheid regime, whose inherent rights to lead a life of dignity and to be treated as a second-class citizen in the land of their birth were trampled upon. Dullah chose to represent them all. The political party to which one belonged was irrelevant. The broad universalist concern, I would argue, led Dullah to embrace the inclusive umbrella of the Freedom Charter. He was one of the founding members of the United Democratic Front, the UDF, which united a broad range of civil society organizations under the banner of the Freedom Charter, calling for a non-racial, non-sexist social democracy. When it came to the organization of lawyers around human rights and democracy, Dullah was at the forefront of founding the pro-charterist National Association of Democratic Lawyers, NADEL, becoming its first vice president. It was at NADEL's founding meeting in 1987 that I met Dullah for the first time. As a young lecturer from Durban, I was struck by his clarity of purpose about the role that human rights lawyers should play in the struggle against apartheid. When I came to UWC in 1989 and joined NADEL's Western Cape branch, the focus of the debates in Dullah's advocates' chambers were already about what a future democratic South Africa would look like. With some inkling of what lay ahead, he was Nelson Mandela's personal lawyer at that time. Dullah noted on 1 December 1989 in a paper entitled Political and Organizational Tasks as We Move into in the 1990s. We need to build up the kind of culture, outlook and method of organization which must serve post-apartheid South Africa as well. Organizing on racial lines hampers this process. The South Africa of tomorrow must be built today, in action as well as words. Therefore, all national and regional structures must be built on a non-racial basis. The second fundamental element of being a true human rights lawyer is that rights are won through struggle. For Dullah, human rights were not a gift of the government, but were won in struggle against the government. In a message of support to a student mass meeting on UCD campus in 1988, he said, "Freedom is something that has to be fought for. Freedom is something that has to be sacrificed for. For you and all of us, in struggle, the freedom is a way of life. Struggle is the way of life. We cannot divide our lives up in compartments." And these words were not idle. Dullah did not divide his life into compartments, a legal career on the one hand and anti-apartheid activism on the other. His legal career was a commitment to the struggle for human rights. There were no half measures, and that meant sacrifice. As we know, during the states of emergency, he was twice incarcerated without trial. He survived 2 attempts on his life. Why did human rights mean struggle? Dullah's view of human rights were that human rights were inherent to every human being. They were an expression of human dignity, the freedom to determine how one governs one's own life, and collectively, with others, the freedom to determine how a society would be governed. Struggle is inevitable because human rights imply limitation on state power. The third fundamental element is that the struggle for human rights was fought primarily through the people, the holders of human rights. Dullah knew the limitations of the apartheid courts. Some battles were won in court, but the realization of human rights would be achieved primarily through mobilizing the strength of the people. He used the example of the legal recognition of some trade union rights in the 1980s, and I quote, "Recognition was won in struggle by workers, not conferred. Legal recognition followed victories in struggle. Lawyers were not at the forefront of that struggle. At best, they played a supportive role." The organization of people was thus vital. Leadership essential, but Dullah stressed the necessity of accountability. He wrote in December 1989, and I quote, "We must build up a style of leadership based on accountability and democratic decision-making. Leadership is answerable to the people at all times." Finally, In his total commitment to the struggle of human rights, Dullah retained his essential humanity. He cared about people, his community, his family. And as Nelson Mandela wrote, also for other people's families. Dullah was not just an exceptional lawyer. He and his wife, Farida, became a pillar of strength to all our families during our incarceration, assisting us in various ways and keeping us together. Dullah had a soft human side. He loved people and had a great fondness for children. I recall taking my 1-year-old daughter to a Nadal meeting. Dullah was happy, jiggling her on his knee, while Joe Slovo spoke about the challenges of transformation. The second phase of Dullah's life as a human rights lawyer was as policymaker. When the liberation movements were unbanned on the 2nd of February 1990, Dullah's commitment as a human rights lawyer found expression in policymaking. How could the democratic South Africa be built on a human rights foundation? This he was able to do full-time when he became the director of the Community Law Centre in July 1990. He attracted to UWC some luminary ANC constitutional lawyers, Zola Skwiya, Bridget Mabandla, Bulelani Ngcuka, Kader Asmal, and Albie Sachs. Collectively, they formed a significant part of the ANC's Constitutional Committee, the body mandated to develop the ANC policy positions for the constitutional negotiations. Professor Jacques Gerwel, the then rector of UWC, not only welcomed them to UWC, but also gave the centre wide operational autonomy. The task was daunting, as in Dullah's first overseas trip in August 1990, he had been denied a passport since 1981. He described to the American Bar Association in Chicago the enormous task lying ahead. In South Africa, he said, we had never had a real constitution enjoying any status above other legislation. We had no tradition of constitutionalism, i.e., a constitution as a point of reference. We never had a Bill of Rights. We never had any mechanism to protect human rights. We never had an independent judiciary. We never had a system which established legality or the rule of law. We never had a legal order enshrining equality and human values as a priority. We've never experienced democracy in our land. You then continue with what we need: democracy, self-determination, equality, social and economic justice, protection of human rights, non-discrimination, a just and humane legal system, a Bill of Rights, an independent judiciary. In short, he summarized, we need a real constitution. We need constitutionalism. We need to build a rights culture. For the next 4 years, the Community Law Centre, working with the ANC Constitutional Committee, was bursting with ideas of how what we need could be realized. I would like to highlight 4 human rights matters among the host of others that occupied Dullah's mind. First, on his list of what South Africa needed was democracy. He told his Chilean human rights lawyers in Santiago in November 1990, the struggle for human rights in South Africa is inextricably tied to the struggle for democracy. Like elsewhere, in South Africa, there can be no human rights without democracy, and no democracy without human rights. The struggle for democracy and independence is therefore the struggle for human rights. Dullah was recognizing the centrality of human rights, of human dignity to democracy and human rights. Human rights protected all human beings' inherent and equal right to determine their life choices. Democracy secures a community, a polity, with the right to self-determine the rules by which it chooses to live. Both must be respected and protected. Where they clash, the mediating mechanism is the rule of law, or constitutionalism. This entails anti-majoritarian mechanisms, the most important of which is an independent judiciary. Dullah wanted an independent judiciary, but not one that is given free rein. In the early 90s, there was some support for an activist judiciary that would effect transformation, in particular by implementing socioeconomic rights. Dullah was not so sure. At the Nadell conference in 1993, he warned that, and I quote, "We must not begin with the assumption that a judiciary is always right." He believed that the locus of power and the social economic reform of the country should lie in the hands of Parliament, not the courts. The greatest challenge in a new democratic government would face, as Dullah saw it, was the deep socio-economic inequality in the country, the product of centuries of white oppression and exploitation, with a profound dehumanizing and degrading effect. Dullah was a socialist. It was an article of faith of his former home, the Unity Movement. Also, within the broad church of the ANC, the South African Communist Party and COSATU advocated an economic revolution to follow on the political revolution. In a talk to COSATU on the 20th of February, 1990, days after he could for the first time speak freely as an ANC member, he said, "Our experience in Africa and elsewhere teaches us that political rights without social and economic transformation do not help the working class. Mere political independence in Africa, Asia, and Latin America has not brought an end to poverty and starvation. Workers remain suppressed and exploited." He argued that for freedom to be real, there must be an equitable redistribution of wealth. And the way to do that is socialism. He ascribed the fall of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe to a lack of democracy. And I quote, "The essence of the revolution in Eastern Europe is the struggle for democracy, not against socialism." As a human rights lawyer, he advocated for justiciable socioeconomic rights. Speaking on behalf of the ANC at the Conference of South African Human Rights Movement, he advocated the protection of socioeconomic rights. The right of trade unions, women's rights, the right to housing, education, and health, and also the right to peace, development, and a clean environment. In July 1991, in a paper entitled "In South Africa, the Inclusion of Social and Economic Rights in a Bill of Rights is Crucial to Deal with Apartheid's Inequalities," Dullah rubbished the liberal opposition to the justiciability of socioeconomic rights. In response to the argument that socioeconomic rights are unaffordable, Dullah said, and we quote here, "Unless the basic objectives or principle of socioeconomic rights is adopted, as well as mechanisms created to move forward systematically towards the achievement of such objectives over a period of time, the status quo will remain for the vast majority of the oppressed and exploited people of this country." He then quoted from the ANC's draft Bill of Rights, where the now familiar phrases of progressive realization and available resources in respect of basic social, educational, economic, and welfare rights are found. Judicial enforcement by an independent court, a judiciary, and a constitutional court was part of his package. As noted above, Dullah summed up the needs of the new South Africa as: we need a real constitution, we need constitutionalism, and we need to build a rights culture. While the first two required the attention of lawyers, the third shifted the focus to civil society. It's expanded the role of civil society from struggling for the recognition of rights to building a rights culture within civil society by embedding the norms of democracy and accountability, non-racialism and non-sexism, tolerance and solidarity in its own practices. Dullah encouraged the formation of civil society organizations in all sectors of society. Speaking in 1990 at the conference of the South African Human Rights Movement, Dullah stressed that civil society organizations, and I quote, must be independent from government and political parties and even transcend political divides. This principle he also applied to academia, a component of civil society. When I asked Dullah to write the foreword to a book I edited on the Freedom Charter, he welcomed the publication. He wrote that the value of the book lay in, first, demystifying the document, and second, subjecting it to critical assessment. Dullah was not looking for jaarbroers. Given the need for a real constitution and constitutionalism, Dullah and his colleagues at the center went purposefully about their tasks. Focused research was done on the structures of government, the position of women and children, the electoral system, traditional authorities, and local government. Drink. Local government was a passion of Dullah. In dividing up the responsibilities, Dullah allocated housing and local government to himself. Already in September 1990, Dullah wrote a memorandum on local government. Local government, he said, has played a key role in the implementation of government apartheid policies over the decades. In a post-apartheid South Africa, it will play a key role either to entrench inequalities and disparities, as well as apartheid itself, or to facilitate the process of eradicating apartheid, racism, inequality at every level. Clearly, a system of local government should be devised which will play the latter role. For a new system, he said, ideally, maximum local autonomy is desirable because maximum local autonomy would ensure democracy, equality, and structured non-discrimination. And then Dullah posed, for the first time in South Africa, and fairly unique in the world as well, the following revolutionary question. Finally, the question arises whether it is not necessary to make provision in the Constitution for broad outlines relating to our vision of local government. This vision of democratic local government found its way into the interim constitution and subsequently in the 96 constitution. Unbeknown to us, until 2 months ago, when I uncovered the document in Dullah's papers, the vision that he set out actually underpinned the work that I've done and my colleagues have done to pursue the ideal of local autonomy at home, elsewhere in Africa, and further afield. Though a great debt we owe to Dullah on this. Many of the other research products of the Community Law Center made their way into the interim constitution. On available documentation, we only have a glimpse of the role that Dullah played. In his own handwriting, he articulated a general right to equality and non-discrimination, and very significantly entrenched affirmative action. This formulation was sent on a CLC letterhead to Comrade Vali Musa on the ANC Negotiating Commission as a compromise to the regime's narrow formulation of an equality clause. Dullah ends the letter with a question: do you think we can sell it? The non-discrimination clause and the entrenchment of affirmative action was indeed sold to the regime and became, in substance, Constitutional Principle 5, and then reproduced in the 1996 Constitution. The first democratic election on 27 April 1994 would herald in the new phase of Dullah's life as human rights lawyer. Aside from Albie Sachs, all the centre's members were on the ANC ballot paper as candidates for parliament. I was thrown into the office next to Dullah to be the caretaker director of the centre during this period before the election. They were all elected to parliament. After an excruciating wait of 14 days, Nelson Mandela's cabinet of national unity was about to be announced. Kader Asmang, sitting in his office across the passage from Dullah's office, must have received a tip-off, for he rushed into my office with the news: he is Minister of Provincial Affairs and Constitutional Development, and Dullah, the Minister of Justice. We burst into Dullah's office, and Kader, in his indomitable style, broke the news with the words, 2 slummies in cabinet. And 2 plum portfolios to boot. They were going to reshape the entire constitutional edifice of South Africa. Kader's joy was, however, short-lived because of trade-offs. He was soon demoted to the portfolio of water affairs and forestry, but which he then revolutionized. For a human rights lawyer, the justice portfolio was of the greatest significance. The apartheid judicial system had to be fundamentally transformed. At that stage, the international image of apartheid South Africa's Minister of Justice was captured in the 1988 movie called A Fish Called Wanda. I don't know if you recall the movie, starring John Cleese and Kevin Kline. Kevin Kline plays the role of a brutal psychopath who, when escaping justice in England, becomes the Minister of Justice in South Africa. Now, with Dullah there, for the first time, we had a real Minister of Justice, who, in the words of Nelson Mandela, had distinguished himself, and I quote, a true leader, progressive in thinking, realizing the importance of education, justice, and a free society. What happens to a human rights lawyer who overnight becomes a Minister of State? In the case of Dullah, the work he had always done simply expanded. Dullah's legacy from his years as Minister of Justice is profound. Let me highlight 2 important elements: building a judicial system on the foundations of human rights and holding violators of human rights to account. His immediate task was to establish the institutions that would secure a legal system founded on human rights. He was responsible for the legislation establishing the Constitutional Court, the Judicial Service Commission, the Office of the Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, and the Commission on Gender Equality. He developed for the Department of Justice a general policy statement and a plan for action called Justice Vision 2000. For this, he relied heavily on our two UWC law professors, Medard Relamira and Lovell Fernandez, who were appointed to the department's policy unit. Vision 2000 firmly committed the department to promote and advance human rights and freedoms, and to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. Within this framework, in the words of Mandela, Dullah, and I quote, set about with customary resolve to transform the justice system, making it fundamentally people-friendly. He was also deeply involved in the Constitutional Assembly, drafting the 1996 Constitution. 2 weeks before its adoption, when a few matters still had to be resolved, Dullah expressed his vision of what the Constitution had to do as follows. Firstly, it must finally establish democratic majority rule. Secondly, it must provide for the protection of legitimate rights, not privileges, but rights to all South Africans, including language, cultural, and religious rights. Thirdly, it must end the humiliation of the majority and restore their dignity. Those who hanker after the good old Baskap days and persist in their racist attitudes and arrogance must know that those days are forever over. Now, fourthly, a constitutional framework which must empower all South Africans to participate in a process that will affect the social and economic transformation of our country to end poverty, homelessness, ignorance, and deprivation. Referring particularly to the Bill of Rights, which he regarded as the most enlightened document in the world, he was adamant, and I quote, "We will never accept a Bill of Rights which is designed to entrench the privilege of the haves against the have-nots. A Bill of Rights can never be a tool in the hands of the rich and powerful to create islands of affluence and privilege." He said further, it must be an instrument of liberation, it must be an instrument of empowerment. At that stage, the property clause was not yet settled. For Dullah, a clause that would legitimate the illegitimate land dispossession and deprivation during the apartheid years was completely inconceivable. Acknowledging that a property clause was inevitable, he said, whilst a property clause, if there must be one, needs to protect the legitimate property rights of all South Africans, it must also enable a democratically elected government to pursue a program of land reform and redistribution and provide restoration or restitution in respect of property illegitimately taken away by the apartheid regime. Prominent in the Bill of Rights was also a range of socio-economic rights to education, health, housing, water, and the environment. The Community Law Centre, now with a new cohort of researchers, played an important role in the formulation of these rights. Sandy Liebenberg, then a senior researcher at the Centre, served as a technical advisor on the Constitutional Assembly's Committee on the Bill of Rights, which he championed their inclusion and gave shape to their formulation. In respecting, protecting, promoting, and fulfilling human rights, a vital element is holding to account the violators of those rights. Dullah would not tolerate impunity. As a human rights lawyer during apartheid, Dullah was adamant that the perpetrators of gross human rights violation should account for their deeds. The apartheid government, sensing an ANC government on the horizon, sought a general immunity from prosecution for their operatives guilty of human rights violations. The ANC rejected this as wholly illegitimate. How could a human rights culture based on the notions of transparency and accountability be established if there was impunity? How could this impasse between the apartheid government and the ANC, which had the potential of scuppering negotiations, be overcome? The solution came from, where else? UWC. Kader Asmal, in his inaugural lecture as the Professor of Human Rights in 1991, put the notion of transitional justice on the map. His argument was simple: amnesty, not amnesia. The ANC Constitutional Committee developed this idea further. There must be a public accountability, not impunity. They argued, and I quote, accountability for gross abuses should remain a fixed goal for any government that seeks to promote future respect for human rights. Thus arrived the innovative notion of conditional amnesty, which became the founding principle for the truth and reconciliation process. Eventually, the deal between the ANC and the government was captured in the interim constitution's post-amble, titled The National Unity and Reconciliation. Dullah described the post-amble in July 1984, and I quote, a commitment to break with the past, to heal the wounds of the past, to forgive but not to forget, and to build a future based on respect for human rights. The responsibility of drafting the legislation fell on the shoulders of Dullah and his department. In this regard, the crucial role of our UWC colleagues, Medard Relamira and Lovell Fernandez, are proudly acknowledged. But Dullah played a dominant role. The Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act of 1995 represented a fundamental shift from the previous focus on amnesty for human rights violators to a victim-orientated truth and reconciliation process. Only one part of the process dealt with amnesty, conditioned on full disclosure and reconciliation. The major focus was on healing through truth and reconciliation and reparations. President Mandela admiringly observed that it was, and I quote, under Dullah's custodianship that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came about. Dullah himself viewed it as one of his greatest achievements. Now, at the very time that South Africa was grappling with the problem of impunity for gross violations of human rights, the United Nations in 1994 commenced the drafting of an international treaty, the Rome Statute, to establish an international criminal court with universal jurisdiction over perpetrators of the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. South Africa, having just dealt with these issues domestically and having founded its foreign policy on human rights, immediately assumed a leadership role in the drafting process. Again, it became the responsibility of Dullah and his department. Medard Relamira became the head of South Africa's delegation at the drafting conference. And we see the South African influence clearly. The goal of the ICC, and I quote, is to put an end to impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes, and thus to contribute to the prevention of such crimes. Once the treaty was signed in 1998, it fell to Dullah to initiate the process of parliamentary ratification, which happened in 2000, the first country in Africa to do so, and to introduce legislation domesticating the treaty in 2002. Back home, Dullah had to face a new form of human rights violations: corruption. Already in 1998, the Department of Justice acknowledged, and I quote, "corruption has become one of the most prominent problems facing the country." Dullah oversaw new legislation on organized crime and corruption. Also, importantly, when the National Prosecuting Authority was established in 1998, it was given an investigative arm, the Scorpions, with a specific mandate to combat organized crime, corruption, and human rights violations. The Scorpions, as we know, were too effective for their own good and was disbanded by the Zuma faction 10 years later. Dullah led by example. If the current lifestyle audit of cabinet ministers had been carried out on Dullah, it would have found him living in 31 Mabel Street, Rylands Estate, where he and Auntie Farida had lived for decades. He refused a ministerial home. His ministerial lifestyle was no different from the struggle days. Nelson Mandela aptly describes Dullah thus, and I quote, "a humbler, more committed, more dedicated person you could not wish for." Now, let us now try to draw together the rich legacy of Dullah Omar, the human rights lawyer in the truest meaning of the word. First, a true human rights lawyer seeks to protect the inherent dignity and humanity of all persons. The task is to ensure the universal application and enforcement of human rights, the very quality Mandela so admired in Dullah. A true human rights lawyer cannot be partisan in the application of human rights norms. Second, human rights are not a gift from the state, but are the result of struggle against power holders, against authoritarian rule, or against the failure to rule effectively and justly. This is a struggle that continues despite the best transformative constitution you may have. A true human rights lawyer is part of that struggle. Third, the struggle for human rights is not principally fought through the courts. It is fought through political mobilization, civic involvement, and civil society. A true human rights lawyer sees the limitations of the law and works with organized civil society. Courts play a necessary role, but it is politics and not the courts that transform society. Fourth, a true human rights lawyer knows that the struggle for human rights is intrinsically and inextricably interwoven with democracy. There has to be a balance between democracy and rights, and this balance is mediated through the rule of law and constitutionalism. At its core lies an independent and impartial judiciary, which should adjudicate with restraint, not assuming the functions of either parliament or the executive, but demanding of them justification for their actions. Fifth, a true human rights lawyer is concerned about deep social and economic inequality. A true human rights lawyer is concerned not only with countering authoritarian conduct, but increasingly with empowering people against the failure of the state to provide the basic necessities of life, the fulfillment of socioeconomic rights. Six, a true human rights lawyer says no to impunity. The task is holding those responsible for human rights violation accountable, thus ensuring their observance in the future. Lastly, a true human rights lawyer reflects humanity and humility, pursuing a cause not their own glory. The task is to serve the people, not as an outsider bestowing largesse, but sharing the humanity of the people being served. Let me conclude with a question. What is the relevance of Dullah's legacy today? We may celebrate the life and work of a great human rights lawyer, admire his courage, activities, and vision that shape the institution of a democratic South Africa. But there's more. As Lucas reminds us, the memorial lecture dedicated Dullah Omar are there to remember, to reflect, and to renew our shared commitment to the values he embodied. Our beloved country is in trouble. Inequality and poverty persists. The state, at all levels of government, instead of transforming society, routinely feeds off itself in rampant corruption. Instead of holding the perpetrators of corruption and violence accountable, impunity rages. In this context, the legacy of apartheid is a call, as Lucas says, and the Vice-Chancellor said, is a call to action, a call for us to be true human rights lawyers. What can be done? Let's start at home. The institute that carries Dullah's name has its work cut out. Primarily a think tank, as before, the institute must tackle the big questions that confront us today. How can social inequality be addressed through socioeconomic rights? How can the rights of children, the worst affected by this inequality, be protected? How can we address the failures of municipalities to do the work that Dullah envisaged for them? How can impunity be replaced by the rule of law? These issues required bold, fundamental, and innovative research. And the University of the Western Cape must continue to invest in the institute and similar institutions on campus that protect the promise of the Constitution. We need to follow the example of Jake Schervel and not allow bureaucratic red tape to hamper initiative. When we turn our eyes to our city, we see the deep chasm of inequality. Spatial apartheid is as evident as before. Poverty is as racialized as before. The basic necessities of life are spread inequitably. How could this be otherwise when the voters of Khayelitsha have no say in how the city makes its decisions on resource distribution? Why can a city of local unity not be established through adopting an executive council system as prescribed by law, where the council comprises of political parties according to their voting strength? Looking at our government today, Dullah would be deeply distressed at the state of impunity that prevails. The impunity of some apartheid operatives who avoided the TRC process. The impunity of those identified in the Zondo Commission as responsible for state capture. And the impunity of those responsible for rampant corruption. After the murder of Babita Deokaran, there has been no prosecution of those who paid the triggerman to silence her for exposing corruption. The fleecing of a single hospital by 2 billion rands. Since the abandonment of the Scorpions, there has been no credible agency with the capacity to investigate and prosecute ongoing corruption. On the international front, a similar impunity prevails. When al-Bashir, the Sudanese president, subject to an international criminal court warrant for arrest for genocide, landed in South Africa, the government looked the other way. Moreover, immediate steps were taken to withdraw from the Rome Statute, the very statute Dullah helped bringing to fruition. Dullah would have been proud when South Africa brought a case of genocide against Israel before the International Criminal Court. Yet there was no word of reproach when Russia invaded the Ukraine, or even when the ICC issued a warrant of arrest for Putin for abducting children. Where is Dullah's universalist approach to human rights that requires that all those whose rights are violated are worthy of protection? Dullah would be dismayed to see the desultory progress made to reduce inequality and poverty. He would be deeply disappointed to see how his ideal of local autonomy is abused by some municipalities for self-enrichment. It is still within the power of the state to redeem itself. The Constitution is not an obstacle to this quest. To the contrary, it exhorts the state to do so, to fulfill the vision that Dullah had for the Constitution. But if government and political parties fail us, what remains? It is Dullah's cherished organized civil society, the independent voice and actions of organized civil society that will have to step up again. A final word. Dullah has left us a legacy of what it means to be a human rights lawyer in the truest meaning of the word. In facing the immense challenges of today, we can do no better than trying, each in our own way, to be that human rights lawyer. Thank you.
That's how tall Prof is. Thank you so much, Prof. Steytler, for that wonderful address that calls on us to reflect on not only the legacy of Dullah, but what he would think of where we are today, and the lovely 3 phases that you've given us, and I hope each of us will reflect on what our 3 phases are, and what being a human rights lawyer is, and also being a lawyer for the people and for the oppressed. Now, it's that dreaded time for me where I'm either friend or foe, because it's Q&A. So either I will take too many questions, or I'll take too few questions in the interest of time. But as they set up, my colleagues are ready with the roving mics moving around, and we'll open up the session for questions, comments. And I ask that we please keep our questions short so that we can take as many as possible. There's a hand, the hand of the gentleman. Got 2 hands, gentleman, 3rd hand. 3, okay? Okay.
Good evening, Prof. Damaris Kiewicz from the Community Engagement Unit on campus. Thanks for a very thought-provoking ending, because I think in our country at the moment, civil society is where the gap lies. But also knowing that for human rights work, there is no money. And so when we look at the local government elections for next year, and we look at community leaders, and we look at the gap of the Human Rights Commission in ensuring communities are capacitated, what role do you think does the Dullah Omar Institute play in ensuring? I mean, I think I'm one of those that was very fortunate for 15 years to work with the Dullah Omar Institute to capacitate leaders. And so there's an urgency in our country for the community voice. What role can the Dullah Omar Institute play in ensuring we revitalize the notion of the Bill of Rights for our communities? Thank you.
Good evening, Prof. My name is Luis Singiselo, and I am an LLB student at this institution. My question is the production of true human rights lawyer, as described, the responsibility of institutions through their curriculum, or are true human rights lawyer people who are simply born miraculously or cut from a different cloth?
My name is Joseph Jacobs. I just got I think for me it's quite a challenging thing that I'm here tonight because I think as a country we have lost the plot, as you've actually articulated that. So me, I just want to ask the question, as an institution, as an educational institution, haven't we lost the plot in terms of educating those who needs to serve in these structures? Because the very structures that is actually filled by those that actually came through academic learning is actually the ones failing civil society as such. So for me is that what role does the educational institutions need to start play? Because surely there's something that is actually telling us that what we put out here is not delivering on the promises of what the civil society requires. That's first, number one. On a practical level, when we look at the threats that's being faced, that our country has been faced, and in fact, at the global level, these past few years, when it comes to medical rights and medical autonomy, that we have violated the rights of humans who did not want to go forth with whatever was projected to them. We have violated that. And yet we, as an institution, not just this institution, but all academic institutions, we have allowed it and accepted that. That also makes us also corrupt in terms of the way we are portraying what is human rights in a sense.
Right, let me ask those three very interesting questions. I'm very happy that you raised the issue of the community and community organizations. But the strength of the community organizations during apartheid was it wasn't funded. It was coming from communities. And in the end, that is still have to be, in the end, the strength, that they are self-sustaining. They're sustained by the idea and what they want to achieve. At the Dullah Omar Institute, and I don't want to speak on behalf of them, they want to see the end of me, so I'll be careful. But one role that they do play is one of education. And a lot of initiatives of training people on the ground. We've got many outreach programs. We produce literature, newsletters that deals with basic issues, and I know the local government project will plan to say, well, what role can we play now in the coming election? Can we formulate issues that communities, not political parties, community who can resonate with them to say, this is the issue that we want to see our elected representatives address. So there's a very important role that can be played, and I'm sure the leadership here in front of me, they're not nodding their head yet, but I'll get them to do so, must take up this nettle, because next year's local government elections is going to be crucial. It's going to really be a turning point in the country. And we have to get now clear voices that we demand that the idea that Dullah had about autonomy, democracy. If people see, well, democracy is misused, abused, why be interested in voting to local government? So it's that rescuing of local government. And here again, civic organizations plays a vital role. On the second question, it's a question of nature or nurture. Do we born great human rights lawyers, or are we nurtured becoming great human rights lawyers. I think that the law faculty plays an important role here and has played over the years to emphasize the necessity of a human rights, know what human rights are, also to go out in the communities and play a role of educating. So it is, and law faculties have their programs to conscientize students about how law impacts and affects a range of communities very differently, and that they are not only there training lawyers to become rich corporate lawyers. And even corporate lawyers have a great responsibility, and many of them, of the big firms, do have a social outreach program where they assist needy causes and big issues. So it is a collective. Education, yes. How do you educate for proper citizenship? The leaders, UWC, look after leaders, produce leaders, have done so for years. Are we failing? Is it a course in ethics that is missing? Can we be taught to behave in a decent way and that corruption is not okay? Because those people who commit corruption, they're well educated. They know the law. They know how to get around the law. There's not a lack of knowledge. It is using the knowledge that they have for nefarious purposes. So it is a collective, again, coming out of civil society to say, well, this is not good. It can't be a thing that you do ethics 1 and 2, and then you walk out a great ethical lawyer, doctor, economist, whatever. So it is the notion of education can be done, but universities do not change people's minds. They can do so in some degree, but it is also to be done on a wider scale by civil society. Thanks. Let me take the next. Okay. You go. And there's one at the back there. And there's another one there.
No, thank you very much, Prof. Steytler. Hope I'm pronouncing it correct. My name is Siyabonga Skudla. I'm a law student. I just wanted to understand human rights or the notion of human rights education in higher education institutions, such as the University of the Western Cape. The notion of human rights education, must it be divorced from education around the socio-political and socio-economic contradictions in society? And if not, then what is the significance of the matrimony between the two?
Greetings to everyone. My name is Mo Aaron van Skalkvik. I'm a final year law student. And I just have one question. You spoke about being a human rights. I think you quoted Mr. or Advocate Omar. You said something about for a human rights law to be born, there has to be struggle. So my question is, most human rights lawyers are activists. And from what I've learned and from what I've seen from throughout the years that I've been studying, the concept of activism within the law faculty is not actually promoted to a certain level of extent. So my question is, do you think the education system kills the future of human rights lawyers, or do you think it's a personal thing for people to choose to leave being social activists to becoming people who are more capitalist and, care less about the communities? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Liema Nsegayomzima Kalima, and I'm a law student also within the faculty. No, don't laugh. No, I'm going to try to be brief and short, Prof. Steytler. You've mentioned Advocate Dullah's approach to human rights and everything. But now there's a problem which will make it difficult from us as the new generation and also the generations to come to follow it when his old comrades fail to follow it. You've mentioned that there's a lack of that the Dullah Omar's human rights approach to human rights is not followed by even political leaders, political parties. So now what I want to clear something for me. If these people don't even follow it, how are we as these people, the mere masses of our people, gonna follow it? Second question is that the other two speakers have clarified that there's a lack of activism within the faculty, within the university also, which now when students, law students to be specific, when they choose to do law, the only thing they choose to do is what? To be corporate lawyers, to be commercial lawyers. Why? There's a concept that there's no money within human rights. And also focusing also to learn about human rights, advocating more. What do they say? These big law firms don't care about that. What do they care about? Commercial, corporate, tax law. How do we transition and train law students to focus more on human rights when these firms that will also have to feed our stomachs don't even care about it? For us, it's going to be difficult to say to students, let's become human rights lawyers, to follow Dullah's Omar approach to human rights. When if I follow it attentively, I won't have a job after my degree. So which becomes a problem. How to approach those concerns? Thank you very much.
Okay, let me answer the three law students' questions. The first thing I would like to say, I'm very happy that there is a generation of students who will follow in the footsteps of Dullah Omar. The questions that you ask, the engagement, means that you guys, you see the difficulties that lie ahead for you, for your future, and that will mean your activism. Now, there's a role for the university, there's a role for the faculty to play in promoting human rights and education and ethics and so on. But there's critically also a role for students on their own. There was an organization, Students for Social Justice, that were powerful. And they organized, and they were not waiting for a faculty to come and say, well, think about local government, think about human rights, think about social impact of law. They were organizing themselves. So that notion of student bodies are part of civil society. You are civil society. And we will, as I argued, there lies the strength of things when political parties lose their way, when we don't recognize them from their promises. And so if we fall back, what remains? Civil society. This is where Dullah Omar spoke to the students in 1988. Sacrifice, action, but engagement with the authorities and to know what you want and where you want to go. So I am very positive that you guys got it right. You will activate, you will think, you will question, and you're questioning me now. That's the way to go. Thanks. Have I dealt with, Right, any further questions? Come, there's one. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Steytler, for a really lovely talk. I was hoping someone else would answer this, would ask this question. So, a little while ago, I became very interested in how one gets out of a institution like the Rome Statute. I became interested in finding out how to do it. As a legal practitioner, how do we get out of this thing? And you told me something I didn't understand or didn't know before, that Dullah Omar himself was instrumental in putting South Africa and contributing to the Rome Statute. But the real issue is now, that faces us right now, is that most of the targets of the prosecution of the Rome Statute have been African states and African leaders, and we see others walk with impunity. We see countries that are not part of the Rome Statute because they don't see the importance of celebrating what Dullah Omar did and being part of the Rome Statute. We see them telling South Africa that they need to arrest this one and that one and all the rest of it. Most recently, we do know, and you mentioned, and I was hoping you'd go the other way as well, quite frankly. You mentioned that President Putin is a subject of criminal investigation and a finding against him by the International Criminal Court. You never went the other way and spoke about, what's the other chap's name? Yeah? And that other chap recently was in a country that you also never mentioned, Hungary, and he was not arrested. Benjamin Netanyahu was not mentioned. And the real issue is, what, as a human rights lawyer, what did Dullah Omar feel about a jurisprudential position that says some people should be subject to the law and others should not be? And we see this flouted openly, completely openly, and without impunity. And I use this example over and over again. It's like someone saying, here's a stop street, I drive a red car, and that means I can go through the stop street. But if you drive any other motor car, any other color of motor car, you have to stop at that stop street. Surely we need to understand that that is a position that is not tenable. Even the fact that other large countries have the choice to not be a part of the Rome Statute, whereas the rest of the majority are part of it and subject themselves to international human rights and the respect of international human rights. Thank you.
I think you raise an important question. Now, the ICC is a body. It is governed by judges. Parties to the treaty nominate judges. And so by withdrawing out of an institution, you're going to influence where he's going. I would think that you are part of that institution, and it's then your duty to ensure that there is the universality principle applied even-handedly. But you also point out correctly that big countries, US, is not part of the Rome Statute. And so it's the incompleteness of the international legal order. It doesn't apply, one tries to have this universal jurisdiction applying to everyone, but power politics obviously plays a role. And it was a whole attempt by the international community to create this international court so that there could be a universal jurisdiction about the grand violators of human rights. So it's an ongoing process. The international legal order is not perfect. It is a process of trying to advance a legal constitutionalism at an international level. And that is a long way out from achieving it. Thanks. Okay.
This is the part where I become for cutting off the conversations. But they will be continued outside at the end when we have refreshments. Please, let's give another round of applause to our keynote speakers. As we move towards the end of the program, I would like to welcome onto stage Ms. Rahmat Omar, the sister of the late Advocate Omar, who will give a word of thanks on behalf of the Omar family. Let's give a round of applause, please.
Chairperson, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to present a vote of thanks on behalf of the family. I appreciate this opportunity particularly as a former member of staff at the UWC's Institute for Post-School Studies, and particularly in the Adult Education Program. So on behalf of Auntie Farida, who unfortunately is not here, and the Omar family, I take this opportunity to express our thanks to the Dullah Omar Institute for Constitutional Law, Governance and Human Rights, and the University of the Western Cape. Firstly, for providing an academic home for the kind of justice-related research, education, policy, and community engagement which my brother Dullah Omar was deeply committed to and involved in. Professor Steytler referred to the evolving identity of the university as the home of the left, to Dullah Omar's role as a human rights advocate and his involvement in the founding of the Community Law Center, which has flourished and has grown to become the Dullah Institute. So in particular, we thank the Institute for honoring the memory of my late brother through the memorial lectures and through the sterling work of the Institute in its teaching, research, policy engagements, and the broader community and public education activities. As a family, we also remember Dullah as a young lawyer, starting in his first office in a rickety old building in District 6, on the corner of Caledon Street and Harrington Street in Cape Town, close to the Peninsula Maternity Home. From that office, we met some of his colleagues in the legal fraternity and young law graduates who were articled clerks at Dullah's legal practice at a time when, under apartheid, there were few opportunities for young black lawyers, young black legal graduates, to gain access as articled clerks in established legal firms. Today, we see that some of those young graduates and articled clerks, no longer young, are associated with the Institute and have gone on to play their own roles in the legal profession and in various transformation processes in South Africa. Dullah was immensely proud of them then and would be even prouder now. So, in addition to his roles as lawyer and mentor, there is something more which Professor Steytler's comments on the university, the institute, and on Dullah's role as human rights advocate reminds us of. And I think Professor Steytler placed great emphasis on this point, that in addition to his legal work, he was primarily an activist. Whether that was through his participation as a young unknown lawyer in the Anti-Pass Laws March from Langa, or as a participant in the mass campaigns of the UDF, later the ANC, and many other political campaigns which were part of the liberation struggle. It was a struggle for justice, equality, dignity, and genuine freedom. It is a struggle which sadly is far from over, as we face old, ongoing, and new challenges On that, there is a lot to talk about, perhaps on another occasion, and perhaps through the dialogues recently initiated at UWC on what it means to be a university of the left in the current context. I would also like, this was not part of my prepared notes, but I would like to say that I'm very impressed by the questions that have come up from the floor, particularly from the law students who raised the question of what it means to be a human rights lawyer and what the role of struggle is in the formation of a human rights lawyer. I think my brother would have been very clear. This is not something that you are born with. It is something that develops through the experience and the direct involvement in the process of struggle which are unfolding within our society at any particular time. There are massive struggles going on in our country at many different levels. The struggles of workers, the struggles of women, the struggles of students. And UWC has a proud tradition of nurturing those kinds of struggles and of giving the lead in those processes of struggle, as well as in the processes of research and policy development, which Professor Steytler has highlighted. So in a sense, the greatest university is the University of Struggle. And we don't have to create it. We as individuals don't have to create it. The struggles are there. And they come from the sectors which are most oppressed, most marginalized. And from that position of oppression and marginalization, grow the struggles to fulfill the promises of the Constitution and to fulfill the dreams that we struggled for during the apartheid period. I feel quite inadequate in making the kind of comments which I think are needed, because the speakers have made such wonderful, impressive comments on the issues of human rights, on the work that can be done in the university. And Professor Steytler in particular has made comments on how the human rights culture, how the dreams of liberation can be taken forward in the processes of struggle. And nevertheless, despite the feeling of being inadequate in following on those impressive contributions, I would like to thank Professor Steytler in particular for reminding us of who Dullah was, and we wish you well in the next phase of your work, although you are now a Professor Emeritus and not full-time in the university. I'd like to give a special word of thanks to Debbie Gordon, who has liaised with the family in a very professional way and with great empathy in coordinating the arrangements for the memorial lectures. The family also thanks all those who have made these lectures possible: the university, the institute, its staff, most especially its students, and the many, many workers, cleaners, grounds and building staff, security staff amongst others, whose contributions are not always visible. We are indeed greatly humbled and honored by all your efforts, and we look forward to a continuing positive relationship in coming years. Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of our evening. Thank you to everyone who's joining us in person as well as online. I think you guys should give yourselves a huge round of applause. Now, to those who are online, have a good evening. To those who are with us in the venue, please join us for refreshments out in the foyer. And as you make your way home, travel safely. And we will see you next year.